They clapped like it was a miracle, but I knew I'd just watched a theft carried out in daylight, while everyone pretended not to see. My name is Marco Rivera. I'm 45, and 5 years of sweat just got handed to a 23-year-old who still smelled like commencement stage cologne. His name is Brady, and he's the nephew of my boss. That's the whole story if you boil it to the bone, but it didn't start here, and it sure as hell didn't end here. The conference room at Stonecrest Supply Network always smells like old coffee and a copy machine that's dying slowly. The blinds half-slice the afternoon light into strips across the laminate table, and some cracked ergonomic chairs lean like they're tired of holding people up. In that room, applause sounded like it came from gloved hands, dull, cautious, insincere. I clapped too. It's what you do when the script says clap. Brady's going to do great things as our new regional ops director, announced my manager, Cliff Rowan, chest out, chin up, a rooster on a fence post crowing about a dawn he didn't make. The title, Regional Operations Director, was the job I'd been training toward since late 2019, the job I'd been told would be mine when old Caldwell retired. Caldwell had retired 2 months back. I'd spent those 2 months solving problems while waiting for the formal nod, the official blessed email. The nod came, but it tipped in the wrong direction, straight into Cliff's family tree. I kept my face arranged into that corporate neutral expression I'd perfected. Present, supportive, not so happy it looks fake, not so stiff it looks mutinous. Brady grinned, shook hands, and said the kinds of things people say when they've just been given something other people built. Honored, excited, ready to learn. He meant that last part. The kid wasn't mean. He was polite in the way of people who haven't needed to be anything else. He spent the last 3 months shadowing me, sitting in on supplier calls, scribbling notes while I explained freight corridors and rush routing, listening while I negotiated price locks on alloy stock, and calmed down a Baton Rouge plant manager whose shipment of shaft housings got stuck in Amarillo behind a jackknifed truck. Brady looked at the chaos and called it awesome. I called it Tuesday. Marco's been invaluable getting Brady up to speed, Cliff added, as if the knife slid in cleaner if he said thank you. Couldn't have done this transition without him. Transition. I swallowed that word like a bitter pill and kept nodding. People filtered out with congratulatory smiles, shaped like grimaces. The room emptied. I stacked my notepad, my pen, a hand steady because I had to be. Marco, hang back a second, Cliff said. I did. He loosened his tie, tried on something like sympathy. I know this might surprise you. It doesn't, I said, and I watched his eyebrows do a confused dance. Brady brings fresh perspective, he continued. New energy. New last name. I didn't say. Out loud I said, sure. You understand, right? It's nothing personal, he added, and that was when the cold part of me, the part that cleans the wound so it won't get infected, said, I understand better than you think. I left the conference room, walked past the framed poster that says integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching, and sat at my desk beneath a flickering light panel that maintenance had promised to fix last October. Around me, the open floor hummed, keyboards clacking, phones trilling, the usual low murmur of a company alive and uninterested in who got eaten to keep it breathing. I opened my laptop, stared at the blank email, and felt a kind of midnight clarity fall into place. I started typing. Not a tantrum. A plan. Stonecrest had hired me in the winter of the year my divorce finalized. I wanted something concrete I could build again. Work that stacked like bricks, numbers that lined up, results that didn't argue with you. I'd been in logistics for a dozen years before budget cuts turned my old job into a severance packet and a box of belongings. Stonecrest touched 4 states from our Albuquerque hub. Heavy components, machine plates, bearings, the hidden bones of factories and water plants that stay invisible so long as they keep working. The work wasn't romantic, but it paid the mortgage, and when I finished a week with more shipments right than wrong, I slept fine. Cliff interviewed me himself. He wore a watch brighter than his smile and spoke in bullet points. Upside here is real, he'd said. Pathways to leadership for people who lean in. I leaned. I knew how. I covered for the short-staffed, traded weekends for stability, drove out to a warehouse in the dark to find a mislabeled pallet because a flood control project needed its gates by Monday or nobody in Valencia County would take a shower next week. My performance reviews bordered on boring. Exceeds expectations, exceeds expectations, exceeds expectations, Like a metronome, no one noticed until the song stopped. Cliff would clap my shoulder, hand me a bonus check sized like a pat on the head, and say, "You're next, Marco." Once Caldwell hangs it up. "We just need patience." I had patience. I didn't have a lot of things left after the divorce, but patience hadn't left. My daughter Camila is 16 now. She visits me every other weekend. On Sunday mornings, she pretends not to notice me, answering a few emails over waffles. "Dad," she'd say, "it's the weekend." And I'd say, "Just keeping things moving, Mija. I'm building something solid here." She would roll her eyes and tell me about her chemistry test, her best friend's drama, a YouTuber I should absolutely know about. She loves robotics club, hates track practice, and always lingers in the doorway when she leaves on Sundays, like maybe she knows my apartment gets quiet in a way that isn't rest. The first crack in the facade came half a year ago when Cliff mentioned, casually, that his nephew would be joining us. "Smart kid," he said. "Business degree. You'll like him." I pictured a kid in an entry-level ops role, learning intake and outbound, doing order consolidations, getting yelled at by a forklift supervisor for standing in the wrong place. Pay your dues. Learn the warehouse before you learn the spreadsheets. That's how I learned. It isn't how Brady learned. He started in the office next to Cliff's with a title that looked suspiciously invented and a salary I didn't ask about because I didn't want to find out. Cliff introduced him around like visiting royalty. "He's here to observe processes," Cliff said. "See how we can reinvent." Reinvent is what bosses say when they want credit for changing what already works. Brady sat with me a lot. He watched a client call where I negotiated a penalty waiver with Iron Mesa Fabrication after a storm in Flagstaff held their beams on a rail siding 2 days. He listened while I walked through our Tucson supplier panorama, how Cobalt Ridge Metals had a habit of promising they had stock until I made them open the rack and send a photo. Brady said, "Sir, more than I needed, asked good questions sometimes. Why does Iron Mesa insist on dedicated carriers for the last mile? And bad questions other times. Can we just bump everyone's freight rate 2% and not ask permission?" I trained him because I believe in not leaving people to drown if you can help it. Also, I was supposed to be training my successor. I just thought my successor would be me. I found out I was wrong on a Thursday. I wasn't supposed to be there. I'd stayed late to finish our quarter projections, and the cleaning crew's radio hummed down the hall. On my way to the break room, I heard voices from Cliff's office. The door cracked just enough. "The board's going to ask questions," a man's voice, older, impatient, said. It was Mr. Vance from corporate, the guy who only flies in when someone's head needs polishing. "Brady's been here, what, 8 weeks? He's got the pedigree," Cliff replied. "And the degree. The board likes degrees." "What about Rivera?" Vance asked. I froze because my name in someone else's mouth always makes me listen. "He's a rock," Cliff said. "Solid, reliable. But he's not executive material. He'll keep doing what he's doing. He's got a kid. He needs the job. He'll fall in line." If you've ever been riding a horse when it decides you're not in charge anymore, you know how your stomach climbs into your throat. I stood in the hallway with the old carpet and the humming soda machine and thought 2 things. 1. I had built a machine, relationships, shortcuts, a map of this chaotic mess that I carried in my head, and they planned to give the keys to a kid who couldn't yet read the legend. 2. My manager had confused patience with permission. I left without a sound, drove home with the radio off, and lay awake staring at the ceiling fan turning in the dark. In the morning, the world looked brighter, the way it does when a decision finally turns from fog into road. Promotions weren't the only thing I had been patient with. I had waited for Cliff to answer emails about a dedicated headcount for the El Paso lane that never came. Waited for a replacement hire when Renee left for a better job, and we just divided her workload like it was cake. Waited while a new warehouse management system rolled out broken and stayed broken until I called a guy in Houston at 9 p.m. and bribed him with an endorsement to speed up our service ticket. I had been patient. The truth is, patience had been eating me. The Monday after the announcement, I came in at 6:30 like I always do. Brady was already there, pallid under the fluorescent light, 3 monitors lit with spreadsheets like he was trying to read the Matrix Raw. "Morning," he said, grateful like he'd been abandoned in a desert, and I was a bottle of water. "Iron Mesa's threatening to cancel if we don't find their grade 8 bolts by noon. They need grade 8 with cadmium finish, half-inch," I said, pulling my chair beside him. They got shorted last week when Cobalt Ridge split a pallet for Louisville, and Dispatch didn't flag it. Pull up my vendor binder. No, not that one. The red one. For the next 3 hours, I taught Brady how our largest customer thinks about time. I taught him why one missing crate of bolts can collapse an entire production line schedule like a house made of playing cards. I showed him the backup suppliers I'd cultivated for exactly this moment and led him through a quiet dance of cajoling, reminding favors owed, leveraging the right price locks. He watched, took notes, asked 2 smart questions, and one extremely dangerous one. When we hung up with Iron Mesa, and I heard the relief in Janet's voice on the other end, relief I had earned over years of showing up and fixing it, I saw Brady's shoulders relax. This is insanely complex, he said. Now you sound like a person who's going to do fine at this job. If you learn before you decide, I said, and he looked like I'd handed him a compass. I spent lunch walking the loading dock, talking to the foreman about a torn pallet wrap, nodding at Manny, who always writes "have a day" on the whiteboard because it makes him laugh that it's not helpful. The guys on the floor didn't care who held the title, not really. They cared when a truck driver arrived after closing and needed a forklift, when the modular crane's motor unit needed a field repair, when the line on bay for kept jamming. Titles are walls you hang on, and these men cared about doors. Janet called me that afternoon. "Rumor says you're leaving," she said without greeting. "I gave 2 weeks," I answered. "I don't care where you land," she said. "Wherever you go, send me the number. I'm not running Iron Mesa's schedule through a son of the family who doesn't know a 2-week lead from a dinner reservation." "Brady is not a bad kid," I said. "And my production line isn't a daycare," she replied. "Call me when you have a new email address." It went like that for 3 days. Border Base Utilities, Skyfork Assembly, a water treatment plant in Las Cruces. None of them were sentimental. All of them pragmatic. In a business built on time, people don't follow you because they like you. They follow you because you showed up at midnight with a bolt you shouldn't have had yet, and a solution you shouldn't have needed. Cliff called me into his office on Tuesday. He'd lost the rooster posture. Worry had softened the corners of his eyes. "I've been thinking," he said, which is what managers say when someone else already did the thinking for them. "What if we create a new position, associate director? You keep your accounts and report to Brady. It's a path back to where you want to be. A path into a hole." "I appreciate the offer," I said. "I'm going to finish my 2 weeks. I'll leave everything documented." "You're going to regret this," he snapped, then modulated his voice. "Listen, don't make career decisions out of spite. This isn't spite, Cliff. This is boundaries." His voice took on that brittle quality people get when they can't believe the world isn't cooperating. "You walk, and I can't recommend you. You walk, and I'll make sure every hiring manager I meet hears about a guy who quits when he doesn't get his way. Then we'll both be telling stories we need to believe," I said calmly, and went back to my desk. That night, Camila and I sat at our favorite taco joint with salsa, so hot it could wake the dead. She dipped a chip, peered up at me over her glasses. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm better than okay," I said. "I quit today." Her eyebrows met her hairline. "What? Why?" I told her the truth, with a little lightning taken out. How people confuse loyalty with silence. How adults sometimes have to decide between being polite and being whole. She listened like a person who was going to run a lab someday and needed the data. When I was done, she nodded the way she does when she's about to say something that might break me a little. "I'm proud of you, Dad." I did not cry. I didn't, but something inside me unclenched that I didn't know had knotted itself around my ribs. The offer from Meridian Ridge Energy came Thursday morning. That was fast, but not surprising. This industry is a small town that spans a continent. David Park, regional VP in Austin, had tried to poach me twice before. He left me a voicemail that started with "finally." We talked benefits, salary, scope, and what he called the unspoken. He meant clients. "We would never ask you to violate any agreement," he said. "We assume you're a professional who understands relationships travel with trust, not logos." "I'm flattered," I said, which in our language means I'm interested. "Interested enough to get on a plane tomorrow?" he asked. I started to say I'd need to check with work, then remembered I'd just decided to stop treating my life like a group project. "I can be there," I said. When I landed in Austin, the taxi rolled past a billboard that read "DO right by people, and you'll never be out of work." The cynic in me snorted. The part of me that still believed in rules wrote it down in my head anyway. David met me in a glass box office that smelled new. "We want you to build Southwest operations," he said. "Title, Regional Director. Budget, you define it. Clients, you're the kind of person they call first, aren't you?" "I like to think I'm the kind of person who answers first," I said. He grinned. We shook hands. On the flight home, I texted Janet a thumbs-up emoji and a plane. Cliff must have felt the ground shift because Friday he cornered me with a printed paragraph from the handbook highlighted sloppy in yellow. "Proprietary relationships," he read. "Any client interaction during the period of employment." "Cliff," I said, calmly, "that clause is about prospect lists and internal pricing data. It's not a leash around my humanity. I didn't sign a non-compete. And even if I had, you'd have to argue it's reasonable. Telling me I can't talk to people who also have phones is not reasonable. You're playing with fire. I've been standing in it for 5 years." The next 2 weeks turned into a tutorial boot camp. I wrote a runbook the thickness of a phone book, forgive me. I'm old enough to remember those, and Brady read it like scripture. He stayed late, asked for examples, rehearsed calls out loud under his breath. I don't hate the kid. That complicated everything elegantly. Hate would have made this easy. He wrote me a thank you note on my last day. "I don't deserve your help," he wrote, which is maybe why I needed it. I cleaned out my desk Friday at 4. The light panel above me still flickered. Manny wrote, "Have a Friday," on the board and smirked at me when I passed. I handed my badge to the front desk. Cliff walked me to the door and dropped the line "Men like him believe will be the last thing you hear" echoing down the staircase. "This isn't over, Marco." "For me it is," I said, and stepped out into a wind that tasted like dust and freedom. Meridian Ridge wasn't a fairy tale, not exactly, but it was a place that didn't lie to itself about what people were worth. David gave me a desk, then told me to stop using it so much. "Get on the road," he said. "Shake hands. Show up." I did. I spent the first month sleeping in hotels with carpets that never felt clean, walking cavernous factory floors in steel-toed boots, learning the names of supervisors' dogs, the birthdays of procurement managers' kids, the coffee order of a warehouse clerk who could get my case on the top of the pile when it mattered. I wrote down everything. I sent thank you emails like I might run out of gratitude if I didn't keep making more. When Meridian's logo appeared on Iron Mace's purchase order, Janet sent me a photo of it with 5 clapping hands. 2 more accounts moved within a quarter. Border Base called. Skyfork called. You know the story. People follow the person who shows up at midnight. 6 months later, I walked into David's office, and he slid a trade magazine across the desk. The headline read, "Stonecrest Southwest Division Stumbles AS Key Accounts Depart." The article mentioned an internal review of hiring practices, an anonymous board source calling recent appointments ill-advised and insufficiently vetted. It didn't name Brady because why would you torch the wrong person by name? It named Cliff. It used the words nepotism and breach. It quoted a supply chain analyst explaining that institutional knowledge doesn't live in databases. It lives inside people, and those people had left. David tapped the page. "Your old house forgot who built it," he said. "Or it never knew. Either way," he said, "we keep doing the basics. Answer the phone. Tell the truth. Don't promise what we can't ship." When I left his office, I called Camila and told her to pick a city for our weekend. She picked Santa Fe. We stood in front of a painting of a sky and agreed the artist had nailed the blue. 3 months later, in Tucson, I ducked into a diner that serves coffee so strong it can stand up on its own. There, in a corner booth, sat Brady. He looked smaller without Cliff's office beside him, wearing a hoodie instead of a jacket, reading a thick textbook labeled Supply Chain Systems in block letters. He looked up and saw me, and the color traveled across his face fast. "Mr. Rivera," he said, then corrected himself. "Marco, mind if I sit?" He gestured like of course, and then the waitress came and poured coffee we didn't need. We talked like 2 people who survived a storm, one who built a shelter and one who learned why men build them. "I left," he said finally. "I wasn't ready. It's one thing to shadow genius. It's another to be the person who signs their name on a failure." He smiled at himself. "Grad school. Thought I'd learn what I should have known before they set me loose." "That's not your fault," I said. "It's your uncle's. He says you poisoned the well," Brady said, and I didn't flinch. "He says you stole clients, sabotaged systems, made calls you shouldn't have. What do you think?" I asked him. He looked down at his coffee. I think people followed you because you never made them feel stupid for needing help. I think I didn't know enough to be humble yet, and it took breaking to figure it out. He closed the textbook. I wanted to say thank you. Not for the job, but for the binder. For not letting me drown. Even when I got handed a life ring I didn't earn. I paid the check because somebody had paid mine in ways money doesn't count. I left him there with his pencil and his second chance and walked out into the heat with a kind of peace I didn't expect. Like forgiveness is a door that swings on the same hinges as self-respect. Stonecrest didn't implode dramatically, it leaked. A valve like Cliff can hold pressure longer than you think. But a year after I left, another article landed, softer headline, harder truth. Board oust executive after internal review. Southwest Division rebuilds. Cliff had filed some lawsuit or another. Wrongful termination, defamation. But the board had emails, and the board had a balance sheet bleeding red. The board won. Cliff didn't learn the lesson that titles teach so badly. That authority without understanding is just a hat on a scarecrow. Brady finished grad school. Last I heard, he took an entry-level planner job in Phoenix. The kind where you count inventory with a clipboard and argue with reality until one of you moves. A year later, someone told me he'd been promoted. Earned, this time. As Meridian grew, my phone rang less for emergencies and more for, hey, got a minute, things. People asked me to weigh in on workflows, on staffing, on whether we should open an El Paso crossdock. I told David no once, and he asked me to explain, and when I did, he said, then we wait. I had never worked at a place where a no could sit down and have coffee without being shoved out the door. Camila and I fell into a new rhythm. I scheduled travel around her robotics meets when I could, and when I couldn't, we FaceTimed from hotel lobbies with carpets that looked like wildflowers drawn by a committee. She told me about a boy in her class who said girls aren't good at engineering, and I told her men say that when they've never been taught to be proud of anything but the mirror. She won a regional robotics award the week I signed Meridian's biggest maintenance contract yet. We celebrated both with churros and a movie we didn't finish because we fell asleep, which she pretended not to think was wholesome. My ex-wife sent a text the next day that just said, "She looks up to you," and I stared at it until it blurred, then set my phone down gently, like it contained something brittle. I got a message from Manny one afternoon. 3 words, no punctuation. Have a day. He'd found me on social media somehow, sent a photo of the loading dock whiteboard at Stonecrest. Someone else had written it in his handwriting, and beneath it, smaller, for Marco. I laughed out loud, alone in my office, and 2 people walking by turned to see what could possibly be funny in a building where people talk about backorder codes like their weather. I'm not a saint. If you're listening waiting for the part where I say revenge felt bad, you'll be waiting a long time. Watching Cliff's hubris trip and fall on a spreadsheet he never learned to read warmed me deep. But the heat that lasts isn't from their fall. It's from your fire. The day my Meridian team passed 1 million units shipped without a late penalty, the warehouse staff brought me a cake shaped like a palette. It looked like a 4th grader had frosted it, and it tasted like a win. 2 summers later, our division sponsored a vocational scholarship. We called it the Hands and Head Award, and the first recipient was a young woman who reminded me of Camila, except she knew how to weld. During the ceremony, I said the thing I wish somebody had etched onto my desk when I started. Don't measure your life in titles or the applause you get in rooms that smell like coffee. Measure it in the calls you take at midnight, and who still calls you the next time they need help. After, a man in a suit came up and introduced himself as a board member from Stonecrest. He said it like maybe I'd flinch. I didn't. We're rebuilding, he said, slick voice neutral. If you ever wanted to talk. I'm home, I said, and shook his hand with all the warmth I reserve for strangers. When you get burned by a place you believed in, a petty part of you wants to salt the earth and watch nothing grow there again. I planted something instead. I hired a former Stonecrest dispatcher who knew routes like road maps and a warehouse lead who understands that safety meetings aren't a box to check. I recommended Brady to a friend's company 2 years after our diner talk because he'd earned it and because grace, practiced properly, becomes a kind of revenge all its own. Proof you didn't let their damage decide your shape. If you're hoping for a finale where Cliff begs and I decline elegantly, take this instead. A voicemail 3 years to the day after the clapping conference room. Marco, it's Cliff. I'm between things. Thought you might. I deleted it like junk mail. Some stories don't need epilogues. Some men write their own. Years from now, someone else will sit in a room that smells like old coffee while a man in a too bright watch announces a decision that was made far from merit. Someone will practice a smile made of glass and decide whether they will swallow it or spit it out into a napkin. If they ask me what to do, I'll tell them what Camila told me without knowing she did. Be the person you would admire if you were 16 and watching. Walk out of the room that asks you to clap for your own erasure. Build another room. Invite the right people. Fix the light panel that flickers above the best desk. Write binders. Answer your phone. Write "have a day" on the whiteboard because it's funny and because some days you do get to pick which kind. Brady sent me a holiday card last year with a photo of him and a dog that looks like it might be a coyote's polite cousin. On the back he'd written, "Got promoted. Earned it. Still using your runbook. Updated with my mistakes." I stuck it to the side of my filing cabinet with a magnet shaped like New Mexico. Under it, a post-it note where I'd scribbled something from a vendor call that felt true then and truer now. Nothing moves until someone cares enough to make it move. They clapped for the wrong man once. That's not the part of the story that matters. The part that matters is what I did with my hands after the clapping stopped. I used them to sign a resignation letter. I used them to shake the right hands. I used them to hold a binder while a kid learned how to swim. I used them to build an operation that took calls at midnight and didn't panic. I used them to clap, loud, joyful, honest, when my daughter crossed the stage carrying something she earned. Revenge didn't look like a billboard or a headline. It looked like a clean dock at the end of a long Friday. It looked like a procurement manager texting me, "You saved my week." It looked like a kid in a hoodie reading a textbook and deciding to become the man who should have had the job. It looked like me, on a quiet Tuesday, standing in an office with a view and realizing the only thing that makes a room worth standing in is the person you became on your way to it.